I'm Madison, 35 female. I live in a small apartment above a bustling Italian restaurant that has been my entire world for as long as I can remember. I'm not just the manager, I'm the soul of the place, the one who knows every regular's name and every secret to my grandmother's marinara sauce. For 15 years, I poured my life into Riccardi S, believing that one day, the legacy my father built would become my own. This is the story of how that belief was shattered in a single evening, and how a forgotten piece of paper from my past became the weapon I needed to reclaim my future. It's a story about family, betrayal, and the quiet satisfaction of serving revenge as the main course. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The smell of garlic and simmering tomatoes is the first scent I remember. It's the perfume of my childhood, the aroma of my life's work. Riccardi's isn't just a restaurant, it's a living, breathing entity, and I've been its devoted caretaker since I was 20 years old. I started by washing dishes, my hands raw and pruned by the end of every shift. My father, Richard, believed in starting at the bottom. "You can't run a place if you don't know how the drains work," he'd say, his voice a low grumble that carried the weight of authority. I respected that. I embraced it. So I worked my way up, from dishwasher to prep cook, from line cook to waitress, and finally to manager. Each step was a lesson in dedication. I learned how to balance the books, how to negotiate with stubborn suppliers, and how to soothe the tempers of a stressed-out kitchen staff during a Saturday night rush. I memorized the birthdays of our regulars and knew which ones preferred their pasta al dente. I sacrificed weekends, holidays, and countless nights out with friends. While my peers were traveling or starting their own families, I was at Riccardi's, patching up a leaky faucet or perfecting a new dessert special. My father was a constant presence, a shadow at my shoulder. In the early years, he was my mentor. He taught me the business with a firm hand, drilling into me the importance of quality, consistency, and hard work. "This place is our legacy, Madison," he'd often say, gesturing around the dining room with a sweep of his arm. "It's more than just a business. It's our name." And I believed him. I believed every word. The restaurant became my identity. The staff were my family, the customers my community. My sister, Tiffany, never shared this passion. 10 years my junior, she existed in a different world, a world of filters and followers that I couldn't comprehend. While I was covered in flour, she was posing for selfies, curating a life that looked perfect from the outside. Her visits to the restaurant were rare and always felt like a royal procession. She would breeze in, air kiss my cheek while carefully avoiding any actual contact with my work-stained apron, and hold court at the best table. She never offered to help, not even to bus a table when we were short-staffed. To her, Riccardi S was just a charming backdrop for her vlogs, a place that provided free meals and a rustic aesthetic for her online brand. My father, however, saw her through a different lens. In his eyes, Tiffany was a star. He would brag about her follower count to our regulars, his chest puffed out with pride. He'd watch her videos with a level of attention he rarely gave to my monthly profit and loss statements. I tried not to let it sting. We were different people with different paths. I was the practical one, the responsible one. She was the dreamer. I told myself that my father valued my work, even if he didn't praise it as loudly as he praised her online persona. The proof was in the responsibility he gave me. He had handed me the keys years ago, both literally and figuratively. I ran the day-to-day operations, made the hiring decisions, and managed the finances. He had effectively retired, content to come in for a few hours each day to chat with old friends and sample the specials. The unspoken agreement, the promise that had fueled my 15 years of sacrifice, was that Riccardi's would one day be mine. It was never written down, never formalized, but it was understood. It was in the way he'd call me his right hand, the way he'd tell suppliers, "Talk to Madison, she's the boss." I was earning my inheritance, not just waiting for it. I was building on the foundation he had laid, introducing new dishes, launching a catering service, and carefully modernizing the decor without losing the old-world charm. Profits were up 20% since I had taken full managerial control 5 years ago. The restaurant was thriving. I was proud of what I had accomplished. I had proven myself worthy of the legacy. I imagined the day he would officially sign it a quiet, proud moment between a father and his dedicated daughter. I envisioned my name on the deed, my future secured within these familiar, comforting walls. My life was planned around this certainty. I had invested my own savings into minor renovations, confident it was an investment in my own future. I had put off buying a house of my own because my small apartment above the restaurant was all I needed. Everything I did, every choice I made, was for Riccardi's. I never once questioned my father's intention. I never thought for a second that my dedication was being taken for granted. In my mind, the succession was a matter of when, not if. That trust, that unwavering belief in a future I had worked so tirelessly to build, was the foundation of my entire world. And it was about to be demolished without a moment's warning. The evening it all came crashing down was my father's 65th birthday. We closed the restaurant to the public for a private celebration. I spent a week planning it, wanting everything to be perfect. I curated a special menu featuring his favorite dishes from over the years, brought in a local jazz trio he admired, and made sure the wine was flowing freely. The room was filled with family, old friends, and loyal staff members. The atmosphere was warm, nostalgic, and full of love. I felt a deep sense of pride, watching him laugh and reminisce, surrounded by the community we had built together. I thought this was it, the perfect moment for his big announcement, the one I had been waiting for. Tiffany arrived fashionably late, of course, with a small entourage of friends who looked completely out of place among the restaurant's rustic decor. She was dressed in a glittering designer dress, holding her phone up to record her grand entrance for her followers. "Happy birthday, Daddy!" she exclaimed, planting a kiss on his cheek before immediately launching into a monologue for her livestream. I gritted my teeth and handed her a glass of champagne, my simple black dress and comfortable work shoes suddenly feeling drab and inadequate. Throughout the night, I played the role of the perfect host, refilling glasses, coordinating with the kitchen, and making sure everyone was happy. I was working, even at my father's party. It was second nature. After the cake was cut and the toasts were made, my father stood up, tapping his glass for attention. A hush fell over the room. He had a contented, rosy glow from the wine and the adoration. "Thank you, everyone, for coming," he began, his voice thick with emotion. 65 years. It's a big one. It's the year a man starts to think about his legacy. My heart started to beat a little faster. I caught the eye of Marco, our head chef, who gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. They all knew how hard I'd worked. They all expected what was coming next. "I've spent most of my life building this place from the ground up," my father continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Riccardi's is more than a restaurant, it's the heart of our family. And now it's time to pass that heart on to the next generation." He paused for dramatic effect, and I held my breath. This was it, the culmination of my life's work. Then he turned, not to me, but to my sister. He beamed, a smile of pure, unadulterated pride on his face. "Tiffany, my beautiful, creative girl," he said, his voice booming. "She may not know her way around a kitchen, but she knows how to connect with people. She has vision. She's going to take Riccardi's into the future." He raised his glass. "So, I am thrilled to announce that upon my official retirement next month, I will be leaving the restaurant in its entirety to my daughter, Tiffany." The sound of my own blood rushing in my ears was so loud that it drowned out the polite, confused applause that rippled through the room. I stood frozen, a serving tray still in my hand. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. He was leaving it to Tiffany? The restaurant? My restaurant? It didn't make sense. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. I looked at Tiffany, who was feigning shock for her phone's camera, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfectly rehearsed gesture of surprise. But I could see the glint of triumph in her eyes. She knew. She had known this was coming. My father finally looked at me, his smile faltering slightly as he took in my expression. "And of course, Madison will be here to help her," he added hastily, as if I were a piece of kitchen equipment being included in the deal. "She'll stay on as manager to handle the day-to-day stuff. The sisters, working together, it's perfect." Perfect. The word echoed in the cavernous silence of my mind. I watched as Tiffany's friends cheered loudly, hugging her as she preened for her audience. My own staff, my work family, were staring at me with expressions of shock and pity. Marco looked like he wanted to throw a pan at my father's head. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, speechless, the betrayal of physical weight pressing down on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. I had given my youth, my energy, my entire adult life to this place. And in one self-serving, delusional speech, my father had just told me that none of it mattered. My loyalty, my sacrifice, my success, it was all invisible to him. All he could see was his golden child, the one who glittered and shone, while I was just the dull, dependable workhorse who kept the place running in the background. The party continued around me, but I was no longer a part of it. I was a ghost in my own home, a stranger in my own life. The legacy I had forged in sweat and sacrifice had just been handed to someone who wouldn't know a profit margin from a pasta machine. The days following the announcement were a blur of hollow motions. I went to work, I managed the staff, I placed the orders, but my heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Every corner of the restaurant, once a source of pride, was now a monument to my own foolishness. The familiar scent of garlic and basil made me nauseous. The cheerful chatter of the dining room felt like a personal mockery. My father acted as if nothing had changed. He came in with his usual oblivious cheerfulness, patting me on the back and saying things like, "You and Tiffany are going to be a great team." He genuinely couldn't see the depth of his betrayal. In his mind, he had given me a gift, the security of a job, a continued place in the family business. He didn't understand that he hadn't just denied me an inheritance, he had invalidated my entire life's work. He had demoted me from his partner and successor to a mere employee in my own home. Tiffany, on the other hand, was in her element. She started showing up at the restaurant every day, not to learn the business, but to reimagine it. She walked around with a tablet, pointing out things she wanted to change. "The tablecloths are so dated," she'd announce loudly in the middle of lunch service. "We need a more Instagrammable aesthetic, maybe some neon signs." She talked about introducing a brunch menu with avocado toast and bottomless mimosas, completely oblivious to our well-established identity as a traditional Italian dinner spot. She treated me not as a sister or even a manager, but as a personal assistant. "Madison, can you get the Wi-Fi password for my friends? Madison, this espresso is a little bitter, can you have them remake it?" She would interrupt me while I was on the phone with suppliers to ask my opinion on a new logo she'd designed, which was just the restaurant's name in a generic, bubbly font. Each interaction was a fresh stab of humiliation. The staff was miserable. They had worked with me for years, and they resented Tiffany's condescending attitude and harebrained ideas. Marco, the head chef, threatened to quit twice in the first week. "She asked me if we can make our lasagna gluten-free and vegan," he fumed, his face red with anger. "This is an insult to my grandmother, her grandmother, and all the grandmothers of Italy." I managed to calm him down, but I knew it was a temporary fix. The restaurant was my ship, and my father had just handed the helm to a captain who thought a compass was a fashion accessory. One miserable, rainy afternoon, I was hiding in the small, cluttered office, trying to avoid another one of Tiffany's branding meetings. My father had told me to clear out some of my personal belongings from the back storeroom to make space for a content creation studio for Tiffany. It was the final indignity. That storeroom held 15 years of my life, old schedules, recipe experiments, festival permits, and boxes of files I hadn't looked at in years. As I sullenly sorted through the dusty remnants of my career, my hand brushed against a heavy, forgotten box tucked away under a pile of old tablecloths. It was labeled Business Formation 2010. Curiosity piqued, I dragged it out and pried open the lid. Inside was a collection of faded documents, the original business license, the liquor license application, health department certificates, and the lease agreement for the building. It was a time capsule from when my father had formally incorporated the restaurant, and I had just turned 20. I had been so proud to be a part of it, even in a small way. I was about to close the box when a thick manila envelope caught my eye. Written on the front in my father's familiar scrawl were the words, "Partnership Agreement." I didn't remember a partnership. I remembered being an employee. I slid the documents out of the envelope. The paper was thick and yellowed with age. It was a formal agreement, full of dense legal jargon. I scanned the first page. This partnership agreement is made and entered into on this 5th day of January, 2010, by and between Richard Riccardi, hereinafter referred to as the senior partner, and Madison Riccardi, hereinafter referred to as the junior partner. My breath caught in my throat. Junior partner. I had been so young, so eager to prove myself. I vaguely recalled my father sitting me down at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of him. He had explained that it was a formality for the bank, something to show that I was officially involved in the business and had a vested interest in its success. D told me it would make it easier to give me more responsibility. I was 20 years old and brimming with ambition. I hadn't questioned it. I had just signed where he told me to sign, my young, loopy signature looking foreign and naive on the page. I had forgotten about it completely, dismissing it as just another piece of startup paperwork. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the dense paragraphs for anything that could help me. Most of it was standard legal language about profit sharing and operational duties, clauses that my father had clearly ignored for years. I had never seen a cent of profit beyond my modest manager's salary. Then I found it. Section 7, Transfer of Partnership Interest. My eyes zeroed in on subsection B, a clause I had never known existed. Right of first refusal. In the event that the senior partner, Richard Riccardi, elects to sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of his ownership interest in the partnership, he shall first be required to offer said interest for sale to the junior partner, Madison Riccardi, at a price equal to a fair market valuation. I read it again, and then a third time. The words swam before my eyes, but their meaning was crystal clear. He couldn't just give the restaurant to Tiffany. According to this document, this legally binding contract that both he and I had signed, he had to offer it to me first. He had to let me buy him out. A slow, burning ember of hope began to glow in the pit of my stomach. My father, in his haste to secure a loan or satisfy some long-forgotten legal requirement, had given me the one thing I needed most: leverage. He had forgotten about this document. I was almost certain of it, but I hadn't. I had found it. And this faded signature on an old agreement was about to change everything. The dusty partnership agreement felt like a sacred text in my hands. I carried it back to my apartment, my mind racing faster than it had in weeks. For the first time since my father's devastating announcement, the suffocating fog of despair began to lift, replaced by a sharp, electrifying focus. This wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a lifeline. But I knew better than to charge into a confrontation armed with nothing but my own interpretation of a 15-year-old legal document. I needed a professional, someone who could confirm that this loophole was as real and as powerful as I hoped it was. There was only one person to call. David Chen had been my parents' lawyer for over 30 years. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his early 70s who had handled everything from the restaurant's lease negotiations to my grandfather's will. He had known me since I was a child. More importantly, he was a man of integrity, someone whose loyalty was to the law, not just to my father's checkbook. I called his office the next morning, my voice tight with nerves, and his secretary put me through immediately. "Madison, my dear, it's been too long," David's calm, measured voice came through the line. "How are you holding up? I heard about your father's interesting retirement plan." The word interesting was classic David, loaded with unspoken disapproval. It gave me a flicker of confidence. "That's actually why I'm calling, David," I said, taking a deep breath. "I found something, an old partnership agreement from 2010. It lists me as a junior partner." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp legal mind. "A partnership agreement?" he repeated slowly. "Richard never mentioned that. Can you bring it in? I'd like to see it." We scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions at work while my thoughts were consumed by the upcoming meeting. I made a copy of the agreement, tucking the original safely away. I felt like a spy in my own life, guarding a secret that could either save me or blow up in my face. Walking into David's mahogany-paneled office felt like stepping into a sanctuary of order and reason. He greeted me with a warm but serious expression, ushering me to a chair. I handed him the copy of the document, and he spent the next 10 minutes reading it in complete silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was the most nerve-wracking 10 minutes of my life. Finally, he set the papers down on his desk and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Well, Madison," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This is a very well-drafted, legally binding document, and you are indeed a partner." Relief washed over me so intensely that I felt dizzy. "So the clause," I whispered, "the right of first refusal, is it real? Can I use it?" "It's as real as the ink on this page," he confirmed, tapping the document with his finger. "Your father's plan to give the restaurant to Tiffany is a direct violation of this agreement. A transfer of ownership, even as a gift, is a disposition of his interest. He is contractually obligated to offer you the chance to buy his share first, at fair market value." He explained the legalities in a way I could understand. The agreement established a formal business partnership, granting me specific rights, regardless of how my father had chosen to treat me over the years. My status as an employee and my salary were irrelevant to my standing as a partner. The fact that he'd forgotten about the agreement or chosen to ignore it did not make it any less valid. "What does fair market value mean?" I asked, my mind already jumping ahead. "It means we'll need to get a formal business valuation," David explained. "An independent appraiser will assess the restaurant's assets, revenue, profits, and goodwill to determine what it's worth on the open market. That final number is the price at which your father must offer you his share." My heart sank a little. I had savings, but I wasn't wealthy. I had poured my extra money back into the restaurant over the years. How will I afford that? "That's the next step," David said, his tone shifting from legal analysis to practical strategy. "First, we need to get the valuation done. I can recommend a reputable business appraiser who specializes in restaurants. In the meantime, you need to go to the bank. With this agreement and the restaurant's financial records, which I assume you have access to, you can apply for a business loan. Given the restaurant's profitability, which you are largely responsible for, you should be a very attractive candidate." He was right. I had years of pristine financial records, all showing steady growth under my management. The irony was almost poetic. My hard work had not only made the restaurant a valuable asset, but it had also created the track record I needed to secure a loan to buy it. David laid out a clear plan. We would get the appraisal done quietly. Once we had the official valuation, he would draft a formal letter to my father, invoking my right of first refusal and presenting my offer to purchase his share of the business. "He will be shocked," David warned. "He will likely be very, very angry. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Tiffany's smug smile. I thought of my father dismissing 15 years of my life as the day-to-day stuff. I thought of the pity in the eyes of my staff. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm prepared." I left David Chen's office feeling like a different person. The grief and helplessness that had plagued me for weeks had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer a victim of my father's whims. I was a partner. I had rights, and I was about to exercise them. The days that followed my meeting with David were a masterclass in covert operations. On the surface, I was the same dutiful Madison, managing Riccardi, with a weary resignation that everyone attributed to my recent disappointment. I endured Tiffany's endless stream of terrible ideas, nodding politely when she suggested we replace our classic checkered tablecloths with faux marble tabletops for a cleaner vibe. I deflected my father's cheerful inquiries about how well his two girls were getting along. But beneath the surface, I was assembling an arsenal. My first move was to contact the business appraiser David recommended, a discreet and thorough professional named Mr. Harrison. He explained that he could perform much of the initial valuation using the financial documents I could provide: profit and loss statements, balance sheets, tax returns for the past 5 years, and supplier invoices. I had all of this information meticulously organized. Late at night, in the privacy of my apartment, I would scan and email him the documents he requested. It felt like I was leading a double life. By day, I was arguing with Tiffany about whether a pasta-free pasta dish made of zucchini noodles was a betrayal of our heritage. By night, I was on the phone with Mr. Harrison, discussing amortization schedules and inventory valuation. The second, and more daunting, piece of my arsenal was the financing. Walking into the bank to ask for a loan of what would likely be several $100,000 was terrifying. I put on my best suit, organized my financial projections into a professional-looking binder, and rehearsed my pitch in the mirror. I met with a senior loan officer named Ms. Albright, a sharp woman who listened to my story with an impassive expression. I laid it all out, my 15 years of experience, the restaurant's consistent growth under my management, and my strategic plan for the future. I presented the partnership agreement as proof of my legal standing. I didn't frame it as a hostile takeover. Instead, I presented it as a formal succession plan, a daughter buying out her retiring father. Ms. Albright was impressed. She grilled me on the numbers, asking tough questions about cash flow, debt-to-income ratios, and my plans for handling a potential economic downturn. Thanks to my years of running the business, I had an answer for every question. I knew our finances better than I knew my own. She told me the application was strong and that the bank would begin its review process. I left the meeting feeling a surge of empowerment. For the first time, I was being judged on my merits, on my competence and experience, not on my relationship with my father. While I waited for the official valuation and the bank's decision, life at the restaurant became increasingly unbearable. Tiffany's influence was growing, and my father was blindly supporting her every move. She convinced him to let her test run a new brunch service on a Sunday, a day we were traditionally closed. It was a disaster. Her influencer friends showed up for free food, took hundreds of photos, and left the place a mess. The few actual paying customers complained about the slow service and the cold food. Tiffany, however, declared it a massive success for brand visibility, showing my father the dozens of social media posts as proof. He ate it up. He saw the online buzz, not the meager cash in the register or the exhausted, demoralized staff. The tension was palpable. My father started to notice my quiet resistance. I wasn't enthusiastically supporting Tiffany's changes, and he interpreted my silence as sullenness. "You need to get on board, Madison," he told me one evening, his tone laced with disappointment. "Tiffany is trying to breathe new life into this place. You should be helping her, not standing in her way with your old-fashioned ideas." Old-fashioned ideas. My old-fashioned ideas had increased profits by 20%. My old-fashioned ideas had earned us a loyal customer base that kept us afloat during the lean years. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The fight wasn't here, not yet. I had to wait for my weapons to be ready. A week later, I received two crucial emails. The first was from Mr. Harrison. The official valuation of Riccardi's, including the building which my father owned outright, was $1.2 million. The number made me gasp. It was more than I had anticipated. But the report detailed every aspect of the business's worth, a significant portion of which was attributed to the strong management and positive revenue trend over the past 5 years. In other words, my work. The second email arrived the very next day. It was from Ms. Albright at the bank. My loan had been pre-approved. Contingent on the final legal paperwork, the bank was prepared to finance my purchase of the business. Reading that email felt like the sun breaking through the clouds after a month of rain. I had the valuation. I had the financing. I had the legal right. My arsenal was complete. I called David Chen immediately. "I'm ready," I told him, my voice steady and firm. "Let's do it." David was pleased. He told me he would draft the official letter to my father and his lawyer. The letter would be polite but firm, stating my legal position as a partner, referencing the right of first refusal clause, and formally presenting my offer to purchase his 100% share of the partnership for the appraised fair market value of $1.2 million. He said the letter would be sent via courier the next day. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the familiar sounds of the restaurant being cleaned and closed down below me. For 15 years, I had worked to build my father's dream. Now, I was about to fight for my own. The letter was delivered at 10:00 a.m. the next morning. I made sure I was in the restaurant's office, ostensibly working on the weekly schedule, when the courier arrived. I watched through the window as my father signed for the crisp, important-looking envelope from David Chen's law firm. He took it to his usual table in the corner of the empty dining room, ordering an espresso from a nervous-looking waitress. I stayed in the office, my heart pounding against my ribs, and waited. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard the scrape of a chair being violently pushed back, followed by my father's voice booming my name. "Madison, get out here, now!" I took a deep, steadying breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked out to face him. He was standing, the letter crumpled in his fist, his face a mottled shade of red I had never seen before. He looked utterly flabbergasted, as if the world had suddenly. "Why turned upside down? What is the meaning of this?" he roared, shaking the letter at me. "What kind of sick joke is this? A partnership? A buyout? Are you out of your mind?" "It's not a joke, Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "It's the agreement we both signed in 2010. You made me a junior partner. You gave me the right of first refusal. I'm just exercising that right." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of memory warring with his disbelief. "That was a formality. For the bank, it didn't mean anything." "It meant enough for you to sign it, and for me to sign it," I countered. "And it means enough to David Chen. It's a legally binding contract." Just then, Tiffany waltzed in, scrolling through her phone. "What's all the shouting about?" she asked, looking bored. "Your sister," my father spat, his voice dripping with venom, "is trying to steal the restaurant." Tiffany's head snapped up, her eyes widening. She looked from me to my father, then at the crumpled letter in his hand. "Steal it, Daddy's giving it to me?" "Not if I buy it first," I said, looking directly at her. "I have the legal right, and I have the financing in place." I made an offer for the full, appraised market value, $1.2 million. The color drained from Tiffany's face. The number hung in the air, a shocking testament to the value of the business she had treated like a plaything. "$1 million?" she stammered. "You don't have that kind of money." "The bank seems to think I'm a good investment," I replied coolly, "based on 15 years of my work and the profits I've generated for this restaurant." The next hour was a storm of fury, denial, and accusations. My father called me ungrateful, treacherous, and cruel. He accused me of stabbing him in the back after everything he'd done for me. Done for me, apparently meaning allowing me to work 60-hour weeks for a modest salary. Tiffany burst into tears, wailing about how I was ruining her dreams and trying to destroy the family. It was a spectacular performance, worthy of her aspiring actress ambitions. Through it all, I stood my ground. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I simply repeated the facts. "This isn't personal," I said, though it was the most personal thing in the world. "This is business. You signed a contract. I am holding you to it." My father, realizing that his anger wasn't working, switched tactics. He called David Chen, putting him on speakerphone, expecting his old friend to talk some sense into me. He was in for another shock. "Richard, I'm advising Madison on this matter." David's voice came through, calm and professional. "The contract is ironclad. My advice to you is to get your own counsel, but they will tell you the same thing. You are obligated to accept her offer, or you will be in breach of contract." My father slammed the phone down, speechless. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a look of profound and utter betrayal. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. "How could you do this to your own family?" he asked, his voice now quiet and broken. That was the question that finally made a crack in my composure. "How could I do this?" I repeated, my voice rising with 15 years of repressed frustration. "I gave my entire life to this place. I sacrificed everything, believing it would be my future, our legacy. And you were going to give it away to someone who has never worked a single shift, who thinks this restaurant is just a backdrop for her social media. You didn't just pass me over, Dad. You made me invisible. You told me my work, my life, meant nothing. You broke your promise to me. I'm just holding you to the one you put in writing." Silence descended upon the dining room. Tiffany was staring at me, her mouth agape. My father finally seemed to see me, truly see the depth of the wound he had inflicted. The ultimatum had been delivered. David's letter gave him 30 days to respond. He could accept my offer and sell the restaurant to me, or he could refuse and face a lawsuit he was guaranteed to lose. The power dynamic in the Riccardi family had just been permanently rewritten. The waitress, who had been hiding in the kitchen, peeked out, a slow, wide grin spreading across her face. I knew then that whatever happened next, I had already won back my self-respect. The 30 days that followed the ultimatum were the longest and most tense of my life. My father, on the advice of his own lawyer, stopped speaking to me entirely. He and Tiffany were a united front of cold shoulders and resentful glares. He still came to the restaurant every day, but now he just sat at his corner table, a grim statue of disapproval, watching my every move. Tiffany abandoned all her rebranding efforts and instead spent her time whispering with him, their heads bent together in conspiracy. It was a war of attrition. They were hoping I would break, that I would be overcome with guilt and retract my offer. They underestimated my resolve. I had spent 15 years bending to my father's will, and I was done. During this period, the staff became my staunchest allies. They had witnessed my dedication for years and had suffered under Tiffany's brief, chaotic reign. They rallied around me with a fierce loyalty that moved me to tears. Marco created a new pasta special and unofficially named it Pasta della Capa, the boss's pasta. The waitstaff went out of their way to be efficient and cheerful, and the kitchen ran with a renewed sense of purpose. They were all rooting for me, and their support was the fuel that kept me going through the silent, agonizing wait. The deadline for my father's response was a Friday. I went to work that morning with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. David had warned me that my father might try to fight it, to drag it out in court out of sheer stubbornness, even if it would be financially ruinous for him. I sat in the office, trying to focus on inventory, but my eyes kept straying to the clock. At noon, my phone rang. It was David. "He's accepted, Madison," he said, and I had to sit down, the relief so profound it made my knees weak. "His lawyer sent over the signed acceptance this morning. He's selling you the business." There were no celebrations, no triumphant confrontations. My father had simply left the signed papers with his lawyer, and for the first time in my adult life, he didn't come to the restaurant. The closing happened 2 weeks later, a sterile affair in a conference room at David's office. My father and I sat at opposite ends of a long, polished table, never making eye contact. He looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by his defeat. Tiffany was not there. The lawyers exchanged documents, I signed a mountain of paperwork for the loan, and then it was over. A set of keys was pushed across the table towards me. They were the same keys I had carried for years, but now they felt different. They felt like they were truly mine. The first day I walked into the restaurant as the official owner was surreal. The staff had hung a small, handmade "Congratulations, Madison" banner over the kitchen door. Marco presented me with a special cannoli, and everyone applauded. I felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, pride, and a deep, calming sense of belonging. This was my home. This was my family. The changes I made were subtle at first. I didn't want to be like Tiffany, coming in like a wrecking ball. I invested in a much-needed kitchen upgrade, bought new, comfortable chairs for the dining room, and gave the entire staff a long-overdue raise. The old-fashioned ideas my father had mocked were the very things I preserved. The quality of the food, the warmth of the service, the feeling of community. The customers noticed the change, not in the menu, but in the atmosphere. The cloud of tension was gone, replaced by a light, happy energy. Business was better than ever. I didn't hear from my father or Tiffany for months. I learned through the grapevine that he had used the money from the sale to finance Tiffany's move to Los Angeles, where she was going to pursue her acting career in earnest. It was a final, parting gift to his golden child. Then, one evening, about 6 months after I had taken over, my father walked into the restaurant. He was alone. He looked hesitant, standing by the door like any other customer waiting to be seated. I walked over to him myself. "Dad," I said, my voice even. "Hello, Madison," he said, looking around the bustling, happy dining room. He looked at the new chairs, at the smiling staff, at the satisfied customers. "The place looks good," he said quietly. It wasn't an apology, not in words, but it was an acknowledgement. It was a concession. "Would you like a table?" I asked. He nodded, and I led him to his old corner spot. I took his order myself, the same veal saltimbocca he'd been eating for 40 years. As I walked away, he called out my name. "Madison," he said, and for the first time, his voice held a note of genuine respect. "I'm proud of you." I gave him a small, simple nod. It was enough. The victory wasn't in forcing him out or in the legal win. The real victory was in this moment, in the quiet hum of a successful restaurant that was thriving because of my vision and my hard work. It was in the knowledge that I had saved our family's legacy not from my father, but for him. The taste of victory, I realized, was savory and rich, much like my grandmother's marinara sauce, a recipe that had been passed down, earned, and finally, truly, made my own.